Today's the day, Husky fans. Spring practice starts now.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. I'm the site editor over the Huskies Wire. And thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day because, Lars, we made it. It's still technically the offseason, but as of today, when the everydayers will listen to this on Wednesday, April 3rd, spring practice will officially be underway at 5 p.m. at Husky Stadium. It is open to the public, and there is so much to talk about. I mean, coming off a national championship, we'll just kind of throw all that on the back burner. We'll throw all the coaching staff stuff on the back burner because outside of the offensive line, which we spent some time talking about on our Tuesday show, Lars, what is the number one thing that you are going to be watching for at spring practice?
I'm going to look for two. I'm going to kind of say 1A and 1B because they go together. Sure. The energy and the level of interest from the players. And I don't, because again, when I say level of interest, everybody's going to be there to compete, right? But which players, and especially which of the younger players, right? Because this spring is all for the younger players. Like let's call it what it is. I mean, yes, Will Rogers is important. All the upperclassmen transfers, things like that. That's great. But this spring is specifically for which young players can show it the most. And I want to see who from 1 to 15 is most consistent, right? And that starts with, showing energy from day one. It's not, oh, hey, I took like 2 or 3 weeks to get into spring ball and kind of get into the form. And hey, he's kind of a late riser. That's cool. And we'll talk about that in the second segment. But I want to see some of those guys jump off from the first week and carry it all the way through.
So I like where you're headed with that because energy is certainly going to be a big thing. I like the energy that this coaching staff has under Jedd Fisch. It seems like they're building everything in the right direction. But for me, I think that the one thing I'm going to be watching most closely is the defensive scheme, where we're probably not going to see too much of it, but I want to see what that looks like, what all these NFL ties are going to have coming down on Montlake, where obviously, like you said, we're going to get to some of the players, some of the position battles, some of the things like that. But when I look at it, it's what is the Steve Belichick effect going to look like? And that's not just coming from me as a Patriots fan. That's coming from just somebody who's really curious to see what that coaching staff is going to look like and what they're going to be able to do, because we know what the offense looks like. We've seen what Jedd Fisch's offense looks like in Arizona. Once it gets rolling, I think we both have a lot of confidence that, after they figure out the offensive line, that it's going to be pretty good. I don't know about top 15, top 20 in the nation in year one, but it's certainly going to be more than serviceable. So it's all going to come down to the defense. And I think that this defense can do a lot of nice things. I think they have a lot of really, really good pieces, and it's just a matter of putting it all together.
Right, exactly. I think that kind of into what I was saying, where it's like, how does it all come together, right? Who emerges, right? Who are the younger players, the older players, who ends up in that final spring game in was it March 1st, March 3rd, one of those
May 3rd,
that first weekend of March sort of thing. May 3rd. Or what did I say, March? Yeah, May 3rd. Yeah, sorry, March, not March, May.
That would be interesting. But, I'll give you that.
Right, no doubt about it, because we'd already be past it at this point, which would be cool. But I think the thing is also, again, because it's part of it, like I said, which younger guys show, but who's the consistent group, right? Because again, as we've both covered multiple spring practices and multiple fall camps, there's a difference when you look at the first week and a half, the first 7 or 8 practices, and then the last 7 or 8, right? Because the first 7 or 8, when we're saying, hey, so-and-so is taking snaps with the first team offense, while it is true, we're not doing that as clickbait, that doesn't necessarily mean that's actually the first team offense. It's like, hey, these are the ones going against the 3s. These are the 2s going against the 2s. Let's see who the actual 1s and 2s are that 3rd and 4th week at camp, because the first 2 weeks, no doubt, are going to be the younger guys, and it's a matter of, okay, who can kind of grasp the most of the scheme, both on offense and defense. But then when it comes to that 2nd and 3rd week, who can truly manage the expectations, who can truly manage all that's coming into them, to your point about the new defensive scheme, about can some of the younger players like a Devon Bryant and Jordan Whitney, can those guys pick up the scheme quickly? And then on your point, one thing I will say on the kind of the coaching side of things, what role is, we know the role, but what role is Vinny Sunseri going to actually play in this defense? because I think he's kind of able to do a couple of different things with inside linebackers and safeties. He's obviously the safeties coach, but I'm saying in terms of his NFL background, his NFL playing pedigree, right? Because Steve Belichick's got the last name and the coaching pedigree, but I don't think Steve Belichick got drafted. No offense, right? I'm not saying that's the end all be all, but like, there's a difference between, hey, I coached and I played in the NFL. And so I think, how do those two work together? And then you bring a guy like Robert Bala from Alabama. How do all these chess pieces work together, and what does it actually look like? Because we both agree there's plenty of potential. And as Steve Belichick said during his press conference, there's a lot of projectability, right? And some of these guys where you're projecting much like high school to college, where some of these guys are going to fit. But then when the execution comes into play, how does it actually line up? Because we could just rattle off probably a 2 deep right now if we wanted to, with Zach Durfee, Russell Davis, Voight and Newfie. I can go down the list. But how does it actually look when these guys are 3 weeks into it and, somebody's picking up a bump or an injury and things like that?
So I like where you're going with that. I'm sorry. I just want to switch gears for a second, because one thing that I think deserves to be hit on that we probably won't get to in the second segment, because A, it's not under the radar, and B, I don't think it's a battle, is the running back situation, where one of my biggest takes that I'm really looking forward to watching is I think that Cameron Davis and Jonah Coleman can be one of the best running back duos in the Big Ten. It's not number one, that's for sure, because that crown goes to Ohio State. That's probably the best in the nation right there. But I really do think that this one is going to be a lot better than some people might think it is. And with the offensive line, again, we're going to see how that plays out. But between Jonah Coleman and Cam Davis, I think we might finally see, in a little bit of a different iteration, exactly what we were kind of expecting going into last year with Davis and Dylan Johnson, where Jonah Coleman and Dylan Johnson are very different players. Let's not get that twisted. But when I just look at what Jonah Coleman specifically brings to this room and what he was able to do in Jedd Fisch's scheme last year, I think he's going to be a fantastic piece. And then with Cameron Davis, between the two of them, I really don't care who starts. I don't. Where I look at both of them and I say, yeah, you guys do very similar jobs in every single category. So looking forward, I think that whoever's on the field, it's going to be a threat to do no matter what. Whereas, if we saw both of them out there last year, or in Davis and Dylan Johnson, I think that when Cam Davis is on the field, it was going to be one of those things where, they're probably going to throw the ball. Yeah, he can run it really effectively, but we're probably going to see a passing set here. So with Jonah Coleman and Cam Davis, that's not necessarily going to be the same issue, where you and I know that Dylan Johnson is a fantastic pass catcher, but this just seems like a different iteration of the offense, and there are going to be a lot of different things they can do there.
I agree. And I'm going to take a page out of your book, but with the offense, and we'll rehash it in the third segment. But how can you maximize the running back room? There's so many bodies in that room. Jedd Fisch talked about not being gimmicky, but being creative and letting the scheme dictate the things versus letting the players dictate the things. And not that the players can't dictate it, but his scheme is so efficient, similar to Ryan Grubb, right? Where you can kind of not scheme guys open, but it's designed to be difficult to defend.
Yeah.
You put Cameron Davis, and again, not in spring ball, but Daniel Ngata, for example, Daniel Ngata and Jonah Coleman. How does that, because you put them both on one side or the other of Will Rogers and see what happens and still have a 3 receiver set. So there's plenty of talent on this offense and in this room. I'm curious, how can you max out the running back room? And kind of just similarly, you could even say for the defense, how can you max out the talent that you have, especially on the upper side? Because I mentioned at the beginning of the segment, you want to see the younger guys develop. But at the end of the day, this team is going to be built on Will Rogers, Jonah Coleman, Cameron Davis, all the upperclassmen, with some sprinkled in underclassmen. So I think which one of you? How can you max it? Again, not like Kalen DeBoer did, where you really went in on the seniors and upperclassmen. But how can you max out Jeremiah Hunter and Giles Jackson, who way different skill sets, but both can be dynamic when they have the ball in their hands? How can you maximize the talent on the roster? Never mind what you do with the offensive line, because that's going to come in time.
Right. Lars, with that being said, let's get into some of those under the radar position battles we might be excited about. right after a message from our good friends over at Fire TV, because Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV, whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament. You're going to want to have a Fire TV, because Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. And hey, that includes all of us here at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels lets you dive into all of the in-game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on all the latest in the world of sports, from March Madness to the NBA to the MLB and lots more. And not to mention, they also have great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, and cooking videos as well. You can check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels yet, you should. Trust me on this. To learn more, you can visit amazon.com/lockedonfiretv. All right, Lars, I'm going to let you kick it off here. What's one under the radar positional battle where, again, we've spent so much time on the offensive line. We've spent so much time on maybe the defensive line as well, even though I've got some things to say about them a little bit later. Where do you want to go with just a position battle that you're going to be watching this year?
So I know we've talked about this not at length, but we've talked about it enough to where we've acknowledged it. Who's playing next to Cam Fabiculanen? Because I think Cam Fab is without question the leader of the safeties when it looks at who's coming back in that room. But then you have McEllisteen, who's had a couple of timely career interceptions. There's a number of bodies in that room, but I'm curious who truly emerges from that. Does Tristan Dunn take that next step under Vinny Sunseri? Because that's a position where we know how great the cornerbacks could be, especially under John Richardson. But a cornerback's best friend is some great safety help over the top. Whether you're in zone or man, having those safeties. And again, we saw what a healthy Cam Fabiculanen can do against Oregon in the Pac-12 championship, against Texas in the Sugar Bowl. We saw what happened when he wasn't exactly at his best, right? Or when he wasn't out there even in general. That secondary took a hit. So who can be the guy next to Cam Fab that steps up? Because I think it's going to be a Steen, at least just to start. But I don't think that's necessarily a guarantee that he's going to be the guy guaranteed penciled in starter when it goes into fall camp.
So I like where you're going with that. And Tristan Dunn is somebody that we definitely need to talk about, because it looks like he's ready to take a jump forward. And in a defense where there are so many young safeties in the room around him, he's really is going to have to find a way to prove himself this spring. And I think he can do that with not only just, continuing to develop, and some of the flashes we've seen from him, especially in 2022 when he played a little bit more than he did this last year. But I also I'm really curious to see just some of those guys behind him. I know we talked about Rashawn Clark, we talked about Raheem Wright, Peyton Waters, Paul Menke, all those guys. But for me, the number one that I'm really looking at is at wide receiver, where specifically I want to talk about in the slot, where I think that the number 2 slot position, there's going to be a lot there, where Giles Jackson, 6th-year senior, is obviously going to be just that guy. He's going to, I wrote about him a little bit over on Huskies Wire, where I think he might be the number 2 target man in the offense behind Jeremiah Hunter. And I don't think that would surprise anybody, being a 6th-year senior with all the experience. But behind him, I think there's going to be a really interesting battle going on between a couple of guys for that second position. And I think it's going to be between redshirt freshman Keith Reynolds and true freshman Audric Harris, where both those guys I really, really like in a lot of different roles. Where I look at Keith Reynolds, I know you and I watched him last fall. We really liked his route running ability. We really liked just the way he was able to move in space. I think he's somebody who we could also see take a step forward as a kickoff and punt returner this year. But he's somebody who I can certainly see growing into that role, where he looks a whole lot like Giles Jackson, similar build and everything like that. But then I look at Audric Harris, and I just see electric game-breaking speed. And I know it's something we've talked about before on the show, where he's not necessarily the same level of a route runner that Keith Reynolds is right now, but you look at his speed, you look at his ability to clear things out, and just what he allows you to do with other guys on the field if he's out there in the formation. I think that alone will walk him into some playing time this year. While I don't necessarily think he'll beat out Reynolds, I think that we're going to see those two going head-to-head for a lot of the same snaps this year.
No doubt. Well, I think that's because it's an interesting discussion to have, because which quarterback is going to build the best relationship with those guys and kind of give them the best balls to be caught, right? Because when you look at Will Rogers, he's more of a point guard, get the ball and distribute. maybe does DeMarcy show that he has some downfield ability? Does Will Rogers flex the downfield ability? Who can kind of maximize? I'm kind of getting myself repeated from last segment. But who can max out their talent the most, right? Because Keith Reynolds, I think we both agreed last year coming into fall camp, like, hey, man, this guy should probably play, like, not a lot, but he's certainly probably going to get 4 games. And then that didn't happen. I don't think of any fault to him, if we're being real. I don't think if you were a freshman or sophomore last season and you didn't play, I'm not taking it personally. I think that's just kind of a nature of the beast, right? But Keith Reynolds is somebody where if he can put on maybe a little bit more weight, right? Because, again, he looked physically strong, but I think just especially being in the slot, one thing that Giles has that nobody else has been able to replicate is the toughness. That man will catch pretty much anything. I mean, Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character in Jerry Maguire. I can't think of the name, but when he's like, I go across the middle, I make miracles happen.
Yeah.
Giles is that guy where it's like he's not afraid to get a hit because he knows how to catch the ball. And I think that's something where he didn't get to show that as much last season. So having those type of guys ahead of them, I think will help the younger guys be like, hey, Jeremiah Hunter, if I'm Audric Harris, that's who I'm looking up to. If I'm Justice Williams, that's who I'm looking up to. Same thing with Giles Jackson. If I'm Keith Reynolds, hey, that's a guy who can play the X, the Y, and the Z. I should probably learn that as a small guy where if I can't just max out in the slot, I need to show that I can do other things as well, whether the ball comes to me or not. I mean, how many times on the record did Ryan Grubb admit, and even I think Jermarcus Shepard acknowledged it a couple of times, like, hey, just because Rome doesn't have a bunch of targets, he's running the route like he's going to get targeted, and then he's drawing those defenders away because he's a decoy, because when Rome draws triple coverage, somebody else is open. So similarly with these guys, right, where Jeremiah Hunter gets doubled, or probably not tripled, but certainly doubled, somebody else is going to be open. Can Keith, any of those younger guys really take a next step? I'm not sure how much the freshmen will play, but I do think Audric Harris is kind of that one in the mix where just you mentioned it, that game-breaking speed. Jason Robinson Jr., pretty good route runner. Justice Williams, good size. Audric Harris. I don't think there's anybody with that speed on this team last year. I
agree.
Rome might have a discussion, but I think that's a different type of speed. I think there's a different level of speed there. So I'm not saying Rome and Audric Harris are one and the same right now.
No, not even close. Yeah, that's just different style of player, different everything.
Exactly, but both had speed, but with Audric's ability to just make one cut and just get right up 25, 30 yards down the field in the blink of an eye, that has to be utilized somewhere in an offense that, again, has a lot of pieces, but we're not looking at that thinking, hey, this is going to be a top 5 offense like Washington was last year. It's okay, can we get into that top 20, top 25 range? And if we do, we're going to need a number of guys competing and participating in that.
So I've got one more here for you. I want to go back to the defensive side and get another young guy just kind of in this discussion here. And I'm going to pick one of, the trio of redshirt freshman corners that we love to talk about. And I'm going to go with Curly Reed. And I'm not going to single out a particular player here because I just want to see where he fits in the mix. Where, if he's taking snaps behind, let's say Thaddeus Dixon, that'd be one thing. But if he's taking snaps behind Elijah Jackson and Thaddeus Dixon's on the other side behind Ephesians Prysock, I feel like that's another thing. Where we could even flip those and let's say Reed is behind Prysock. I feel like that's going to be just a really telling sign about his development because he's somebody we haven't seen yet. And, we saw him a little bit over the spring and in the fall, but it was never really anything major. And I think it's time for him to just kind of take that step forward into his development. And while I don't know how big of a role he's going to have this year, I think that he could make a name for himself this spring and maybe just force the coaching staff to say, hey, I deserve playing time because I'm the perfect prototype for Steve Belichick's defense on the outside. And while, I don't think I'm going to unseat Elijah Jackson or Devon Banks or Jordan Shaw, some of these guys that might be in front of me, I want to prove myself and just say, hey, you can't continue to not give me snaps. And I'm not saying that they're doing that on purpose, but he's just saying in my second year, it's time for me to take this big step forward. And he can do that because he's such a perfect fit for this scheme. And I think that the more that I look at him, the more that I just look at how this all profiles, he could end up being just a true lockdown corner in this defense.
I can't disagree with anything you said, but give me Leroy Bryant every time. I'm just there.
So I like where you're going with there. I just look at him more in the slot than I do with Curly Reed.
No, and that's the thing. I think, but one of those 3 corners is going to pop. I think that, and probably, I would say one's going to pop who's going to shine, and then the third one is going to maybe find a different role. Maybe goes to safety, maybe goes to nickel corner, right? They maybe kind of evolve their role more so than anything else. But when you look at the first two, I mean, Leroy Bryant, man, the ability that kid has, especially with that size, is similar to Curly Reed, but in the slot. I mean, that's like Elijah Molden ball skills with Kevin King size. Not exactly either of those two, right? But it's like similar ball skills, similar size, right? I mean, I remember talking to Stevie Johnson, who was his trainer, and he's like, he's got a Damian Lillard mindset. So I think getting those kids with that type of mindset and that hunger, those two are going to shine more than anything.
So absolutely, and we can't leave Caleb Presley out of this conversation. It's such a crowded room. We got to spend a minute on that. Where it's such a crowded room, and he's such a highly touted local kid. Where we did see him really improve from the spring into the fall. He absolutely did that. But then the more that we look at it, it just feels like and it's probably going to end up being the same for all three of these guys. But it's probably going to be one more year of sparing time in the rotation for all three of you, and then in 2025 it's full go, where there are going to be multiple guys leaving, whether it be, Elijah Jackson, prize stock for the draft. Maybe you throw Devon Banks in there if he has a solid season. And then behind them, it's, these guys are ready to step in. Jordan Shaw is going to be ready to step into a bigger role. And, with all the work that they're doing on the class of 2025 as well, those guys are going to have to push for playing time sooner rather than later. So that's going to be another fun thing to watch, and I expect big things out of that. And Lars, with that being said, let's get into some of our other expectations that we've got for spring ball. Right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel, because the sports calendar is loaded, and FanDuel is making it even more exciting to get in on the action, because right now new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet the tourney, the MLB, the NBA, the NHL, and so much more. You can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a big win. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and we love our friends over at FanDuel, so make sure you go check them out for everything, where, the Final Four is coming up. MLB opening day just happened. There's so much fun stuff, and FanDuel can help with all of it. All right, Lars, what else are you expecting from spring practice? Because there's so much fun stuff to go through, and I just want to let you just be open-ended. There's no wrong way to take this.
So I'm going to take it for this has nothing to do with fans, team, or anything. I'm curious how the players who are returning react and kind of respond to practicing in the evening. I'm curious if there's a different type of vibe, because again, it's not a major thing one way or another. I mean, again, they practice in the morning under Kalen DeBoer. They've won 25 games. So clearly it's not like one works and one doesn't. But my point with this is when you make that much of a shift, especially going from one semester in the fall to now in the spring, how does that impact things? And then similarly, kind of in a way, how does that impact with recruiting, right? Can you get even more guys out for a practice after school versus, hey, you kind of got to be late for school, but if we want you to come out and see our practice, or we got to wait for you to have a week off, which makes it impossible to get kids out on a consistent basis. And obviously no school wants to tell a high school kid, hey, skip your first 2 classes and come watch us practice. But we care about your grades. Like, it's one of those where you're kind of not really sending the same message there. So for me, it is an intrigue. I kind of like that we're going to have spring practice in the fall or in the evening hours. Jedd made that clear that that's going to be his mantra moving forward at his press conference, which also was an interesting indicator. But I'm just curious, like, what's different about it? Did the players respond better to it? Again, and one other thing, now to the fans. The fans have always clamored for, hey, we wish we could do this. We wish we could do that, this and that. Every Saturday, if that stadium isn't at least somewhat decently filled out in terms of at least in the lower bowl with fans, because it's open to the entire public.
All practices are open.
No. But I'm saying,
so you're right. I just wanted to make sure that caveat is added in there, where all practices are open. So there should be some expectation for that as well. But especially Saturdays, you're absolutely right.
And again, it's like, okay, if you're a Husky fan, you say you're a diehard Husky fan. How do you prep in the fall? How do you think Georgia fans in the spring and summer prep for their Saturdays down south? Let's be real. Like, so there's a way in which you commit to it. And again, I understand parking. I understand you got 3 or 4 kids. I get that. But you can find a weekend, one Saturday in the month of April to come out and watch this team if you truly believe in it. Right now, again, if you don't like to hire Jedd Fisch, well, I haven't really heard that. So that would be a weird cop out now. But this is kind of something where, Jedd mentioned it at his press conference, and we touched on it on the podcast, where you set lofty goals for yourself. The fans expect lofty things from Jedd Fisch. So match that level of energy, right? You give to Motley Futures, you give your time, it's free to the public. Like, that's the thing. You got to pay for parking, but you can take the light rail, you can take X, Y, and Z, you can do a parking ride. There's plenty of ways over the last couple of years that they have made it easier for fans to get to Husky Stadium. So, I mean, if I can have a parent text me saying it's the easiest trip they've ever made because they just land at SeaTac light rail to Husky Stadium, meet their kid, light rail back home, back to the airport, I'm sure Husky fans who actually live in the area can find a way to show up.
So I like that you make that point because, spring game attendance, it's not everything. And Jedd Fisch did set some lofty goals saying he wants 40,000 here, even though there's never been more than 30, which, I mean, hey, respect to that. And we'll see if that actually happens. But please.
There hasn't been more than 5. I don't know where that 30
came
from.
I think that's an all-time record kind
here.
of thing. I think that's just kind of like an all-time record kind of thing. I'm not arguing. I'm not going to get into that because you're right. But again, that's a very, very good point where he made the spring game on a Friday night. We'll see what that looks like. But there are so many things where it's Husky fans have absolutely clamored for this. And if you want to get more involved in this program, you want to see what's going on, just show up. That's going to be a very important thing where it would be fun. Like it's fun to just come out and watch football in your spare time. It's great. I couldn't agree with you more. But on top of that, one of the other just big expectations that I have is I really do expect to see a lot from just this coaching staff as a whole. And I'm expecting to see some of these veteran leaders step up. And I'm not just talking about, the Will Rogers, the Jeremiah Hunters, the Ephesians Prysox, the Jonah Colemans, who are new to this team, who, have a lot of experience under their belt. But I'm talking about Alfonso Tupatala. I'm talking about Carson Bruener. I'm talking about there are no other starters on offense. I'm talking about Giles Jackson. I'm talking about some of these other guys that have been in this program for a while. Cameron Fabiculana is another good one. I want to see them really step up into a leadership role where we absolutely saw them do a little bit of that last year, but now it's their time to shine. And I think that's going to be really important to watch to see just, one of those things are who's holding these other guys accountable on the field when, you're not going 100% through a drill. You're not doing those things. Who are going to be those guys that not the coaches, the players that are holding their teammates accountable for that?
Yeah, the Elijah Jacksons of the world, right? Because we talk about the cornerbacks taking a massive step under John Richardson. Part of the reason Takario Davis isn't at Washington at this point in time has to be Elijah Jackson, right? Because John Richardson, that's the easiest call to make, right? He got a Ephesians Prysox, so clearly you could get Davis if you wanted. But the more that you look at Elijah Jackson, again, we talked about the injury history and things like that, but he stayed healthy for the most part last season. If John Richardson can tap into his potential and get back to that 43-inch vertical that he had back in 21 or 22 in the offseason, of course. But still, like, he showed that vertical leap against Texas in the Sugar Bowl. So Elijah Jackson got better with marginal coaching in the secondary last year. I mean, I don't want to get too into the weeds on this, but again, knowing the quality of coach that John Richardson is, the track record that he has, I think that's why we have these expectations, right? Why Devon Banks, if healthy, should step up. Why Ephesians Prysox, when he makes that transfer, it's because he knows how good John Richardson is. Elijah Jackson was one of the players that Jedd Fisch mentioned from day one that said, hey, he was in my office saying, hey, what can I do? Not, and here's the thing, not begging, not like, hey, what can I do to, keep my spot and not have you bring all your transfers from Arizona. It's like, hey, coach, I'm here to stay. I'm staying. That's what he told Jedd Fisch. He's like, hey, I'm staying. I'm going to work. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And by the way, that's a starter. Now, one thing I will say to your boy, Dylan Johnson, well, our guy, Dylan Johnson, but I know your guy as well. He named 2 names that said like those are going to be some guys. Guess the 2. One on offense, one on defense. Ooh. One on offense, one on defense.
So one name that I heard, I'm going to go with the name I heard from Roger Rosengarten on offense, and that's Zach Henning. So
okay, it wasn't Zach Henning, but that is a good name because I think when it comes to younger offensive line, but he mentioned one of our favorite guys from about a year and a half ago, Denzel Boston.
Oh, love that.
As somebody on offense to watch, and goes without saying, the player he mentioned on defense was Carson Bruener, the linebacker. He's like, Carson's been that guy. I mean, I've bumped into Carson, I think 3 or 4 times this offseason. I'm like, Carson is he's ready to be a pro, but he's staying loyal to the program to get him to be a pro. Now, again, his dad could, the bloodline's there and all that, but Carson as a bona fide starter this season next to Chupatala, Robert Bala's got something cooking there. So I think Steve Belichick, how can Belichick turn him into, I don't want to say Gerard, but how can he maximize Carson Bruener? Because Carson Bruener is a pretty good all-around linebacker. Again, he showed he can blitz, showed he can drop in coverage. That's a prototypical NFL linebacker right there if he gets the right coaching, which I believe no doubt he will.
I couldn't agree with you more there. And then just last thing really that I just want to say that I expect that the transfer portal is going to be very fun. Where I know it's not a hot take. I know it's nothing like that. But my bold prediction, and I feel like we can probably end it with this because we'll see how bold it really ends up being. But I don't think there are going to be many players that leave this program. I think that if anything, we might see a couple at logjam positions where we saw Will Nixon exit at running back. I wouldn't be surprised if we might see one more there. But I think that there are going to be a lot of talented players incoming where we'll see that looks like. Offensive line is really going to be the big one to watch, and then tight end. But if we see one more guy, I wouldn't be surprised if it's at receiver. I wouldn't be surprised if it's at tight end. I think that we're going to see 6, because Jedd Fisch had 79 scholarships, 6 are really talented transfers that can step in and be part of the 2 deep to help fill out this roster.
And one that's visiting this week, Philip Bleedy.
Yep, that's another good one.
Which I think we'll probably talk more about later on this week because he's coming up April 5th and 6th. There's so much ironic parts in that story where I'll give a little teaser for the everydayers out there. He was actually going to take an official visit to Arizona before he transferred to Indiana back from Texas Tech a couple of years ago. Ended up canceling that visit, not making that trip. This one, and for a different reason, not because of Jedd Fisch, it had nothing to do. His position coach went to Indiana, so that was a natural move for him. So nobody can really fault him for that. And he kind of laughed. He's like, "Yeah, I'm not skipping this one." Like talking with Steve Belichick, talking with the entire coaching staff. The entire coaching staff is on him. So I think that's another one where going on defense. Obviously, the offensive line, no doubt, you need a couple of guys there, but the defensive line could use a body. Again, wouldn't hurt.
Sure. Another defensive tackle never hurts anybody. And Lars, with that being said, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your constant support. And now it's time for spring practice. So get excited. There's going to be so much more fun content coming this way between that, the NFL draft, all the other fun stuff that we've got coming. So make sure you keep it right here on Locked On Huskies and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you like the video. Click that little bell so you never miss when we post new video. Leave us a comment down below. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it all really does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Thursday.